Is Shaman the Wounded Healer, The Fruitful Darkness, Being with Dying, and Standing at the Edge. Her first children's book will be released next year. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Roshi Joan.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. And I'm wondering, just because I'm on satellite, if Karen or Rob or someone can, I see you're recording. I'd like to record actually from my side, because the recording will be of better quality. And so you have to give me permission. I don't know if you can.
One moment, let me see if I can do that. Do you know how, let me see if I can give you permission.
There's a magical way on Zoom. I don't happen to know.
Allow record.
Thank you.
I hope that works.
Yes, that works. So I want to begin with the deepest thanks for the organizers of this really important endeavor. I think that we're all acutely aware of the importance of us magnetizing people to the polls at this time. And I also feel that many of us are struggling with both acknowledged and unacknowledged grief. I'm up at the refuge, which is at 9,400 feet. Fortunately, not touched by fire. But the haze of fires from various parts of our country have moved in and out of this valley. And of course, being on satellite, I have access to the images of the apocalyptic fires that are consuming our Western United States. And also the apocalyptic fires that are consuming our political world. Apocalyptic fires related not only to racism, but to the incredible corruption in our government at this time. And the deep sense of desolation that many people feel, not just those of us who enjoy a certain quotient of privilege, but I'm speaking particularly of those who are in the sacrifice zones in our country. And I'm speaking, of those who are living in the kind of sleeve of inner cities, on the margins of Houston, where the gas companies are poisoning, toxifying the atmosphere. And I'm also speaking about Indigenous peoples in our country, who have been, like Black people, subjected to extraordinary and generational abuse. And it is a time of reckoning, in my humble estimation, reckoning that I think has to come out of the sense of a deep sense of grief that is authentic, that is not just emerging at this time, but that has been under the skin of our lives, not just in our lifetime, but really for generations, in relation to the profound exploitation of our environment, colonization, and now the death of species in this era of sixth extinction. So recently, someone shared a poem with me. I often use poetry as a way to convey something that's boiling up inside of my heart. And I thought it appropriate to share this morning to begin a talk. that I hope will, open a door, a small door or a small window for us as we begin to write these letters to those whom we're trying to magnetize to vote in a way that is compassion-based. And the poem goes, it's actually, the title is Watching My Friend Pretend Her Heart Isn't Breaking. And it's by Rosemary Watola Tromer. On Earth, just a teaspoon of neutron star would weigh 6 billion tons. 6 billion tons equals the collective weight of every animal on Earth, including the insects, times 3. 6 billion tons sounds impossible until I consider how it is to swallow grief. Just a teaspoon, and one might as well have consumed a neutron star. How dense it is, how it carries inside the memory of collapse, how difficult it is to move then, how impossible to believe that anything could lift that weight. There are many reasons to treat each other with great tenderness. One is the sheer miracle that we are here together on a planet surrounded by dying stars. One is that we cannot see what anyone else has swallowed. I think my question that I'm sitting with day after day is how heavy is the weight of grief? Does it weigh us down to such gravity that we cannot act? Or does the weight of it break our lives open to the moral imperative of action in our time? So our tradition is an interesting one. I think many of us online are practitioners of Buddhism. I see quite a few old friends online today. Many of us are not only old friends, but we're elders. And we're elders who have lived through the waking up in the 60s around issues of race and of violence of war, of waking up as feminists in the 70s, and of in the 60s and 70s of having come into this practice. And I know for me personally, in the beginning of my practice, I was not really able fully to integrate social action with the contemplative path. But on another level, I was inspired into Buddhism precisely by Thich Nhat Hanh when I was in New York in the mid-60s, and Thai was at Columbia and I was at Columbia. Later he was at Princeton. And I realized that there actually was a path of integration. But I didn't realize fully that there is a history that is interesting to consider or to be familiar with in relation to Buddhism as a revolutionary activity. And for years I related to a line from, actually it's the title of a book by Jiddu Krishnamurti called The Only Revolution. And the second part of that line, which referred to the contents of this book by Krishnamurti, was the only revolution is the revolution within. And I think that my ambivalence in relation to social action or socially engaged Buddhism was a little bit influenced by Krishnamurti, and was why really, even though I had deep inspiration from Thai in the mid-60s, it was quite a while before I understood that Buddhism historically is a path of not only inner revolution, but outer revolution as well. Now, recently, I read a very interesting critique of some work done by a Buddhist scholar named Stephanie Balkwell. I'm not a Buddhist scholar, but I enjoy Buddhist scholarship. I think many of you know. And I think that Stephanie Balkwell's work, and she's at the University of Winnipeg, it just put some interesting light on socially engaged Buddhism. And the reason I'm bringing it up is that I feel that I want to expand the landscape that gives a deep rationale from the point of view of history and scholarship of why Buddhism is not just about the only revolution is the revolution within, but also has deep historical roots that I think are inspiring for us to be aware of. She made the point that Buddhism is not an apolitical religious tradition, although it's often seen as apolitical or as basically a kind of neutral tradition, or a tradition that espouses a neutrality by some Western practitioners and also scholars. And she writes that this is probably a socially biased interpretation of ancient sources that disallows historical realities in the lived experience of Buddhism as a tradition, and is not really understood, in our contemporary culture by most of us. My perspective on this is that it also, this perspective of neutrality or apoliticality could easily be as well the result of the privilege that is present in the white Western world in relation to how practice unfolds in the world of privilege and also scholarship, where perspectives of neutrality and apoliticality make it possible for certain individuals to actually avoid the presence of social suffering and of environmental suffering, and also of the necessity of taking social responsibility through bypassing and also through moral disengagement. Now, I don't think this pertains to the 150 or 200 people who are online today, but I think it has been a note. It has been present, certainly in my long relationship with Buddhism, and watching how there's been an emphasis on the contemplative or monastic at the cost of what I feel is the moral imperative of social engagement. And I think it's really important what we and you are doing today to get out the vote and to help others, support each other, to come alongside each other, to awaken to the truth of the climate catastrophe in case someone has missed it, to the truth of racist violence in case it has been ignored, to the truth of the erosion of character exemplified by too many of our politicians, in case that has not been recognized. And if we just step back a mere 2,500 years ago in relation to the Buddha's own journey toward enlightenment, it begins, interestingly enough, with a prophecy that he would become either a universal monarch or an awakened one. And his father had a plan. And the plan was for him to become a so-called monarch. And as a result of that, he was sequestered in the palace, as we all know. Bulk will put it interestingly, she calls it his father, the Buddha's father, preferred the imperial option. But the Buddha soon enough renounced palace life in order to seek awakening. And in the process, after his awakening, he became a social reformer by abandoning social norms in relation, for example, to the caste system, or ordaining women at the insistence, we all know, of his stepmother, of ordaining untouchables, and even ordaining the serial killer Angulimala against the concerns of King Pasendi. So we can look in a way at the Buddha not only as a religious reformer, but also as a social reformer. And humbly, may I say that we Buddhists today, I believe, have an imperative to be social and political reformers, if not revolutionaries. I want to just name a few other interesting historical bits. Again, I think it's good to look at the ground of our history in order to understand that we are not alone. Our ancestors have worked for the ending of violence, the ending of racism, the ending of discrimination, not only within the internal experience, but also within societies as well. And I'm thinking about, in this regard, King Ashoka, who was in fact responsible for the spread of Buddhism across the Asian continent. And we know that after about 8 years of rule, Ashoka waged a violent war against the kingdom of Kalinga, and where massive slaughter happened. And he went into the midst of this carnage, seeing the wounded and burned flee. And he fell upon his knees and he says, "What have I done?" And according to the legend, he went through this powerful conversion, renouncing violence, and he converted shortly to Buddhism. And his edicts, which are still visible today on rocks and pillars, were based on ethical principles, primarily related to the creation of a just and humane society, particularly in terms of religious tolerance, nonviolence, and ecological awareness. Ashoka's very interesting role model for us. I want to mention one other historical perspective here that caught my attention, and this was in relation to Chinese Buddhists who were living in the 4th and 5th centuries, where there were it was a very fraught time, and several groups of Chinese Buddhists developed practices that brought the tradition into engagement with the painful realities of their society at this time. This was the sect of the teaching of the 3 stages, and it was dedicated to social work among the poor, into building treasure houses for the poor, as well as for lay and monastic practitioners. And although it was suppressed, it has had an interesting impact on socially engaged Buddhism today, and is probably the foundation for various Japanese Buddhist sects that are contemporary, and also provides the doctrinal basis for socially engaged Buddhism as we know it now. I want to acknowledge Sensei Alan Sonoki's work with the Dalits in India. Dr. Balkwell makes a note that in Buddhism, there have been what she has called emancipatory opportunities for some of society's most oppressed members, including women, and also including for the huge untouchable community, Dalit community, in terms of the 20th century movement founded by Baba Ambedkar. I also want to just name some of the contemporary elders, though, that have touched all of our lives, who have applied insights from meditation practice, also insights from precepts, the world of precepts, in terms of social, political, environmental, and economic suffering, as we know it today, and the ending of injustice, particularly to individuals who are marginalized by the power groups. These include our dear Thich Nhat Hanh, who has been in a state of extreme vulnerability, but has been an extraordinary voice, magnetizing many of us into a deeper commitment as socially engaged Buddhists. Sulak Shivaraksha, who from Thailand, Arya Ratne of Sri Lanka, and these 3, among others, have campaigned relentlessly and have organized millions of new converts, and have faced death threats and have been threatened with imprisonment or have been imprisoned. And some have founded schools and universities. It's a new kind of powerful Buddhism today. But going back just briefly to the Pali Canon, one of the things that has been of real interest to me has to do with what it means to be a compassionate and wise leader today. And there's a really interesting fascicle, if you will, called the Dasa Vidya Rajadhamma, the 10 qualities for a leader to cultivate and possess, which is in the Rajadhamma. And I would suggest, even though these are very high bar qualities, this is a kind of map that I find very useful in terms of how we actualize leadership today. And those 10 qualities are generosity, ethics, altruism or unselfishness, integrity or honesty, gentleness, self-restraint, non-anger, non-violence, non-oppression, patience, uprightness, and being congruent with what will truly benefit others. This is right out of the Pali Canon. Dasavida Rajadhamma, these 10 qualities. So recently, my good colleague, Dr. Cinder Rushton, who has the Bunting Chair in ethics at Johns Hopkins Hospital, she shared some guidance on integrity during the recent Upaya Buddhist Chaplaincy Training Program. And I just find that this guidance that she offered is really interesting for us to consider. And they're a sort of way or a path for us to reflect on this inner discernment process that could help us keep aligned with our values. And the first is to reflect on, I know what I stand for. I live my values. I inquire and am curious to discover what will serve. I ask the hard questions. I speak out for what I stand for. I listen to calls of conscience. I am courageous despite risks. I take principled action or inaction. I am responsible and accountable. So years ago, I remember working with Arnie Cutler and Therese Fitzgerald and Thich Nhat Hanh in recasting the precepts of interbeing, which became the mindfulness trainings. And the 9th mindfulness training, it was precept, was really important for me. And I think it's important for us. The 9th mindfulness training is on truthful and loving speech. And it makes it clear that we have to take a stand for justice. And the last line of the mindfulness training ends with these words. We will do our best to speak out about situations of injustice, even when doing so may make difficulties for us or threaten our safety. I think this admonition, what Cinda shared, the Dasa Vida Rajadhamma, and also the actions of our now very elder friends, Thich Nhat Hanh, Arya Ratne, Sulak, Joanna Macy, and others who have sent their voices from a base of profound integrity as social revolutionaries and as Buddhists, and then to the time of the Buddha, remembering that we are in the weave of all beings and things, the life of all beings and things. And we have a moral responsibility to meet this world with compassion, with wisdom, and with courage. So I want to finish my talk with one more short piece, author unknown. It's called Cultivating Peace and Dismantling War. As one who aspires to practice the way of non-harming and compassion, on this day, I solemnly swear to hold all life sacred. I vow to cultivate peace, to greet all guests with compassion, to feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, heal the sick, shield the defenseless, bring the young to safety, and rescue the old from indignity. I vow to work for communities of connection in which all people can realize their full potential and contribute to the common good. I vow to dismantle the workings of war, both within myself and in my society, in the tradition of Buddha, Gandhi, and King. I pledge nonviolent resistance to institutions and governments that destroy life. I will stand in solidarity with my sisters and brothers who refuse to pay taxes for weapons of war and who are conscientious objectors. In realizing my own true nature, I vow to stand for peace. I vow to protect our earth from limitless greed and to dispel ignorance, spreading justice and mercy in every direction. And then I say, may we spread justice and mercy in every direction. May we exercise the right to vote and vote wisely. May we send our voice and help others to do so in order to end racist and sexist violence in our world. May we end our addiction to lifestyle and recognize the catastrophic impacts of our consumeristic habits on climate and our earth. And may we end the supremacy of the privileged few so all can enjoy equal justice and equal care. This includes working toward the transformation of our economic system, our system of government, how we educate and care for our young, how we treat our elders, and how we treat our earth and indigenous peoples. And may we do so even if it threatens our safety and puts our life at risk. At this very time, there is no question that we need dramatic and systemic change. We together can make good trouble. Thank you, John Lewis. And bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice. Thank you, Dr. King. We can do it whether we are a contemplative or social activist, whether young or old, whether rich or living in sacrifice zones. And clearly, we must do it now. So I thank you for writing these letters, for voting wisely and compassionately, for standing in the midst of the charnel grounds of injustice. I thank you for your bodhisattva work.